Imagine standing in ancient Egypt as workers place the final stones on the Great Pyramid of Giza. Now imagine that, thousands of kilometers away, a herd of woolly mammoths is still wandering across the frozen Arctic. Not fossils, not legends, living animals. That sounds impossible, but it's true. For generations, we were taught that mammoths vanished at the end of the Ice Age, disappearing into a distant world humans could barely remember. But one extraordinary scientific discovery shattered that timeline. In 1993, a team of Russian and American researchers studying mammoth remains on the remote Arctic Wrangel Island uncovered radiocarbon dates that rewrote one of paleontology's biggest assumptions. These mammoths weren't 10,000 years old. They weren't even 8,000 years old. They had survived until roughly 4,000 years ago, meaning that while one of humanity's greatest monuments was rising from the Egyptian desert, the last woolly mammoths were still walking the earth. That's not just an interesting coincidence, it's a completely different version of history. Today, we're uncovering 5 extraordinary animals that survived far longer than almost anyone realizes. Some lived alongside the world's earliest civilizations. One was hunted to extinction within a single human lifetime, after scientists first described it. And together, these stories reveal something unsettling. Extinction didn't happen all at once. It followed us. Let's go back to Wrangel Island, because the story doesn't end with one surprising radiocarbon date. Across windswept Arctic tundra, beneath skies locked in winter for much of the year, small herds of mammoths wandered through frozen grasslands long after the rest of the world had moved on without them. Isolated from the mainland by rising sea levels roughly 10,000 years ago, this small population found itself stranded on a patch of Arctic tundra with no predators, no competition, and, for a while, no humans. Over generations, they shrank. Researchers studying the remains found that these island mammoths stood around 6 feet at the shoulder, roughly 2/3 the height of their mainland ancestors. An evolutionary response paleontologists call island dwarfism, where limited resources favor smaller bodies. But small is relative. A 6-foot-tall mammoth is still taller than almost every adult human alive, still carrying curved tusks, capable of goring a wolf pack, still one of the largest land mammals on the planet at the time. And these dwarf mammoths held on for 6,000 years after their mainland cousins vanished. The last confirmed population died out around 4,000 years ago, well after the invention of writing, well after the pyramids, in an era when Sumerian scribes were pressing wedge-shaped symbols into wet clay. The Ice Age, for this one isolated herd, simply refused to end on schedule. And if a species that iconic, the poster animal for the entire Pleistocene, can quietly survive 4 millennia past its supposed expiration date, it raises an uncomfortable question. What else did we get wrong about the timeline? But the mammoths weren't the only survivors. Picture the mainland United States at the close of the Ice Age, glaciers retreating, grasslands shifting, and giant ground sloths, animals like Megalonyx and Eremitherium, some standing over 10 feet tall on their hind legs, roughly the height of a basketball hoop, vanishing around 11,000 years ago, right alongside mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and most of the other famous Ice Age giants. That's the extinction event most documentaries stop at. It's the one everyone learns. But a 2005 study, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, led by paleontologist David Steadman, compiled radiocarbon dates from ground sloth remains across the Caribbean, and found something the mainland record couldn't show. Far south of the vanishing mainland herds, on humid, isolated islands untouched by the wave of extinction sweeping the continent, ground sloths were still walking. On islands like Cuba and Hispaniola, isolated populations survived thousands of years longer than their mainland relatives, likely because humans simply hadn't reached those islands yet. The youngest confirmed dates put island ground sloths at roughly 4,500 years ago, meaning these animals outlasted the great North American megafauna extinction by nearly 7,000 years, quietly persisting on a handful of Caribbean islands, while civilizations rose and fell on the mainland, less than 1,000 miles away. The lesson buried in those bones isn't just some sloths lived longer. It's that extinction isn't a single event with a single date. It's a wave that moves at the speed of human expansion. And wherever humans hadn't yet arrived, the Ice Age simply kept going. And this next story proves just how quickly millions of years of evolution can disappear. Picture dense, misty forests at the bottom of the world, untouched by anything on two legs for millions of years. New Zealand had no land mammals to speak of. No wolves, no big cats, no bears. Instead, it had birds. 9 species of moa, flightless giants, that filled the ecological role predators and grazers occupy everywhere else on Earth. The largest, Dinornis robustus, stood close to 12 feet tall with its neck extended, taller than a basketball hoop, taller than the giant ground sloths we just covered. An animal that could look a modern giraffe close to eye. Moa had no natural predators and no instinctive fear of anything walking upright on 2 legs. That made them catastrophically easy to hunt. Polynesian settlers arrived in New Zealand sometime around 1280 CE, and in a 2000 paper published in the journal Science, researchers Richard Holdaway and Christopher Jackham compiled archaeological and radiocarbon evidence showing that all 9 species of moa were extinct within roughly a century of human arrival, with the last confirmed populations gone by around 1445 CE. Read that again. Not 10,000 years, not 4,000. A single century, well within a handful of human lifetimes, closer to the era of Christopher Columbus than to the last ice age. An entire ecological guild of giant birds, present on that landmass for millions of years, erased in less time than it takes a language to fully drift into a new dialect. If you want to know how fast megafauna extinction can actually happen, once humans and giant, naive animals collide, the moa are the answer. And the answer is terrifyingly fast. If you think those extinctions feel recent, this next one happened so recently that the scientist who discovered the animal watched it disappear. If the moa extinction feels close to modern history, this next one isn't close. It is modern history. Picture a shipwrecked crew huddled on a fog-bound, treeless island in the Bering Sea, watching enormous shapes graze quietly in the shallows just offshore. In 1741, naturalist Georg Wilhelm Steller was aboard the St. Peter during Vitus Bering's Great Northern Expedition when the ship wrecked on that remote, uninhabited island. Stranded there, Steller became the first, and functionally, the last, scientist to formally study a massive marine mammal, now known as Steller's sea cow. It was a relative of the modern manatee and dugong, but built on an entirely different scale. Adults reached roughly 30 feet long and could weigh up to 10 tons, longer than a school bus, and heavier than 2 adult African elephants combined. Steller described them as slow, gentle, almost tame, grazing on kelp near the surface in small family groups, completely unbothered by the presence of stranded, starving sailors. That gentleness, combined with a documented location, was a death sentence. Word of Steller's discovery spread through fur trading and sailing crews working the North Pacific, and the animal's calm, shallow water feeding habits made it almost effortless to hunt for meat and blubber on long voyages. By 1768, just 27 years after Steller first described the species to science, it was gone, hunted to extinction in under 3 decades, inside a single human lifetime, by people who could have read Steller's own published notes describing the animal while it was still alive. That's the part that should genuinely sit uneasily with you. This isn't an animal we know about only through fossils and radiocarbon dating. It's an animal that was scientifically named, described, sketched, and studied by a real person with a real publication record. And then it was extinct before that same person's contemporaries had finished their careers. The line between prehistoric monster and recently observed by science isn't blurry here. There is no line at all. But perhaps the most haunting evidence isn't found in written history. It's carved directly into the bones. Finally, back to the open grasslands of South America, to an animal that looked less like anything alive today and more like a tank that had somehow evolved a face. Glyptodonts, armored relatives of modern armadillos, carried a fused, dome-shaped shell that could reach the size of a small car. The largest species, Doedicurus, added a spiked, club-like tail on top of that armor, an animal that looked purpose-built by evolution to survive literally everything except one thing: people with tools and a plan. At a site called Campo Laborde, in Argentina's Pampas region, archaeologists excavating Doedicurus remains found something the fossil record rarely preserves so clearly. Cut marks on the bones, consistent with deliberate butchering, alongside stone tools, all dated to roughly 7,000 to 8,000 years ago. That's not the aftermath of some ancient, unknowable ecological catastrophe. That's a documented, physical record of people processing an armored giant for meat, thousands of years after the main wave of South American megafauna extinction is usually said to have finished. Put the pieces together, and a pattern starts to emerge that no single animal on this list could show you alone. Extinction wasn't a wall these animals hit all at once. It was closer to a slow-moving tide, arriving at different coastlines at wildly different times, and in every single case we've covered today, the tide arrived exactly when humans did. Not before, not by coincidence, but because of us. When we picture extinction, we imagine a sudden catastrophe, a single day when the giants disappeared forever. But the fossil record tells a very different story. It wasn't one event. It was a slow-moving tide, island by island, continent by continent, species by species, and almost every time that tide arrived, humans arrived with it. Mammoths survived into the age of the pyramids. Ground sloths quietly outlived the Ice Age by thousands of years. Giant birds vanished in less than a century. A peaceful sea giant disappeared within the lifetime of the man who first described it. The age of monsters wasn't as distant as we'd like to believe. In geological time, it ended only yesterday. Next time, we're going even further back, to the single Mongolian desert dig that unearthed a skull so strange, scientists still argue, almost a century later, over what kind of animal it even belonged to. If you want to understand how much of Earth's most extreme history is still sitting one layer of sand away from being rewritten, subscribe now, because we're not slowing down, and you don't want to be the one hearing about the next discovery secondhand.